What's going on, everyone? It's the Fantasy Football Almanac back at it with another fantasy football video. Today we are going to be discussing the lessons from Week 11 of the 2022 NFL season. Before we get into it, if you guys could go down, give this video a like. Again, I'm answering every single comment, so you guys have trade questions. I know the trade deadline just passed, but if you're in a league, maybe it doesn't. Buy low, sell high type of players. Start sits as well. Anything, I would love to help you all out. With that, guys, let's get right into the video of the first game of the week. The first game of the week was the Titans versus the Packers. I'll start with the Titans side. First, we see Derrick Henry drop 25 points as usual. I mean, his slow start to the season didn't mean anything. Honestly, he looks really good. I mean, so far this season, he's the running back 1 in standard scoring, running back 2 in PPR. He looked just as good, if not better, than he did last year, and that's a really, really high bar to set. Derrick Henry, he looks to be an anomaly among all anomalies at the running back position, staying healthy very, very consistently, and I'm knock on wood for any Derrick Henry owners, but he's a very, very talented player. Arguably could be the running back 1 taken in fantasy football next year. Most likely it will be Christian McCaffrey, but Derrick Henry easily has a case to be the number 2 running back. Then we got Treylon Burks, a guy who looks really pretty good in this offense again. I mean, 111 yards. Yes, he did get a bomb throw at the end that kind of salvaged his day, but even still, I mean, 8 targets, 7 receptions. It's a pretty good day considering, I mean, they really have no other wide receivers. Their second best wide receiver is Robert Woods, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. I'm not really too worried about any of them sapping volume, so I think he is a good waiver wire pickup and somebody you should rock with for potentially the rest of the season. On the Packers side, it was okay. I mean, it wasn't really that great of a showing. I will say A.J. Dillon is pretty much toast. I mean, 6 carries, 13 yards. They are not using him at all. The trend the last few games has not been great either. He hasn't passed 15 total opportunities since week 6 of the NFL season, so things are not looking too good for A.J. Dillon. But we just see Christian Watson look like an absolute beast. I mean, again, getting 2 touchdowns out here. Yes, he only had 6 targets, but it still is promising. Aaron Rodgers does definitely trust him with a deep ball now, which is exactly what we like to see. And again, with Romeo Doubs out, the situation for him to get more and more volume is only going to go up from here. The next game I want to talk about is the Falcons versus the Bears, and this game was actually a really good game. All Bears games have actually been really, really good recently, but we do see Justin Fields again continue his streak of dominance. I mean, this time only having 22 points, which feels low for Justin Fields, but for any average quarterback, that is really, really good. We see David Montgomery get heavily utilized now with Khalil Herbert sitting on IR. David Montgomery does get 19 fantasy points here, 67 yards, a touchdown, and 54 yards receiving, which is pretty good in my book. I mean, you're never going to be mad with 19 fantasy points from running back, especially somebody, when you got Montgomery as late as you did. Darnell Mooney looks like he almost could be viable as a start. I mean, I wouldn't do it, but his last 3 games, he's had 2 double-digit fantasy performances, which is fine. He's okay. He's going to get the job done, but it's not going to be all that great. I just want to talk about him to say maybe you could pinch him in a flex if need be. Cole Kmet finally has a cool-off game, only having 5 fantasy points, 35 yards on 3 receptions. Nothing crazy. I mean, it makes sense. He needed a game to cool off here. On the Falcons side, we see Marcus Mariota put up his usual 17 type of game. Cordarrelle Patterson is the most heavily utilized running back yet again, but the bulk of his fantasy points came on a 103-yard kick return, which was actually a beautiful kick return. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. But he does get more carries than Tyler Algier, Caleb Huntley, all of them. So Patterson is the main running back here yet again, and they're probably just going to keep ramping him up as time goes on. Drake London pretty much doing nothing, 2 yards, but a touchdown salvages his day, ends with 7 fantasy points. Nothing crazy. Kyle Pitts is now on IR too. Sorry, Kyle Pitts owners, it's probably been the roughest season. He might be the biggest bust in fantasy football this year. I mean, it's been awful. I mean, unless you want to count like Javonte, but I would say Kyle Pitts is a bigger bust just because there was so much hype going around him, and he actually stayed on the field for most of the season, unlike Javonte, and still did nothing. So, very, very painful season for Kyle Pitts. The next game I want to talk about is the Ravens versus the Panthers. Overall, this was a very boring game to watch. I mean, really no excitement. 13-3 final score. Not too great of a game. Baker Mayfield didn't really play all that well. It was his first game back, so nothing really too much to expect there. We see Chubb get 4 carries, get 3.5 points. Deonta Foreman do basically nothing, limited to 2.4 points. Despite the fact that this wasn't really a negative game script for the Panthers, it was a little concerning to see for Deonta Foreman. Furthermore, none of the wide receivers really did all that well. Terrace Marshall was the only one who did decently, getting 76 yards, but only 3 receptions. 6 targets, yeah, but nothing crazy. On the Ravens side, it wasn't really sunshine and rainbows either. Lamar having 15 fantasy points. None of the running backs really doing anything, with Kenyon Drake having 10 carries, 46 yards, leading the way there. Nothing really all that crazy. But Demarcus Robinson was the story, I guess, of the game, and having 9 targets, 9 receptions for over 100 yards. This is a player we know is not going to be able to produce that consistently, so I don't even think he's worth a waiver wire spot. Yeah, he had a boom game. I think it's like throwing finding like a needle in a haystack. He's going to have 1 or 2 of these games a year, but we know who he is already. Mark Andrews does okay as well. I mean, 6 receptions, 8 targets, 463 yards, but realistically, nothing crazy. Moving on to the Browns versus the Bills. The Browns actually ended up scoring a lot of fantasy points in a losing effort. I mean, Jacoby Brissett having almost 26 fantasy points. The split between Chubb and Hunt has been made pretty clear, and Kareem Hunt is not being utilized like that type of guy that I think most people thought he would be last year, where he was being utilized actually pretty heavily. I don't know. It's been really painful with Kareem Hunt for Kareem Hunt owners. Nick Chubb has not missed a single game. But we've seen Nick Chubb get at least a decent workload, 14 carries, but only 19 yards. I think both of these players are guys that I think Chubb's probably a low-end RB1, and Kareem Hunt's more so, like, I don't know, a very, very low-end flex play, mostly just like a bench depth piece, which is unfortunate. But we do see Amari Cooper ball here. I mean, getting 8 receptions, 113 yards, 2 touchdowns. Donovan Peoples-Jones get pretty heavily involved, and I'm really excited for when Deshaun Watson comes back, because I think these performances will be a lot more consistent from both of these players. We also see Njoku return. He wasn't really utilized that heavily, only 3 targets for 17 yards. But only got 37% of snaps, down from his usual 80%, 90% of snaps. I think they're just trying to get him back integrated, but this is a good sign for Njoku. Over on the Bills side, Josh Allen finally had a regression game, putting up 13 fantasy points, nothing crazy. Devin Singletary utilized pretty heavily, 86 rushing yards and a touchdown to get him 17 fantasy points, which is pretty good. We see Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs be okay in the passing game. But it doesn't even matter because Tyler Bass had 23 fantasy points. They were kicking field goal and field goal and field goal to be able to win this game. The next game I want to talk about is the Commanders versus the Texans. I mean, this game was a stinkfest through and through. The Commanders went up really early. I mean, it was like 20-0 at one point. Then the Texans scored a garbage time touchdown to make it look closer than it was. The Texans were never in this ball game, so they couldn't run the ball. That's why Dameon Pierce wasn't really utilized that heavily. Brendan Cooks had a nice stink fest. Nico Collins wasn't really all that great. There's really nobody you can trust on this offense besides Dameon Pierce. So if they're in a very negative game script, I think their whole team is pretty much a wash here. We see nobody get pretty much anything. On the Commanders side, we do see, again, a pretty even split between Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson. The only thing is Gibson is more used as the pass-catching back with three receptions, 3 targets. So that's at least a good sign. But none of the receivers on the Commanders side really did anything either. And the leader was Curtis Samuel, who had 2 targets. So pretty sad. I mean, he does have 9 fantasy points. It's okay. Maybe if you start him, you'll be not disappointed. But it's not a good fantasy performance from him. Now the next game is the Colts versus the Eagles. And this game was actually surprisingly close. I think the Eagles kind of lost a little bit of their mojo after their loss last week to the Commanders. Pretty concerning, but we do see Jalen Hurts get 24 fantasy points. But nobody else really produced all that heavily. I mean, Miles Sanders only having 5 fantasy points. Their wide receiver leader was Devonta Smith with 10. Nothing really crazy to write home about. A.J. Brown only had 6.5 fantasy points. Even the Philadelphia tight ends really didn't do anything. I mean, their leading tight end was Jack Stoll with 1 reception, 7 yards, so nothing crazy. On the Colts side, we see Matt Ryan not really have a great game. Jonathan Taylor finally starting to get some semblance of what's going on again. I mean, 15 fantasy points, fine for him. We see the split again between Campbell, Michael Pittman, and Alec Pierce. All these guys kind of gobble up targets from each other. I mean, they all ended up with like over 6 targets, but none of them really did anything with it. I mean, 10.5 points for Pittman, 9 for Campbell, and then a 4-point showing for Alec Pierce. Nothing crazy, nothing to write home about. And it's because this offense is going to be very inconsistent on a week-to-week basis. Now, the last game I want to talk about for the week, and if you want to see the rest of the games covered, I will be posting a part 2 tomorrow. But the last game I want to talk about, it was another terrible game to watch. Patriots versus Jets. I have a bunch of Jets fans, friends. They were infuriated the entire time, and for good reason. I mean, 9 of 22 from Zack Wilson. The throws he was making were absolutely terrible to watch. I mean, some of the most painful throws I've seen from a second-year quarterback ever. And I know the Patriots defense is good, but oh my god, was this bad. It did end on a thriller at least, though. I mean, the only exciting part was the last, 20 seconds when I forget who it was, ran back like a 70-yard punt or something. But other than that, I mean, not a good game overall. Michael Carter didn't play well from the Jets. Their leading receiver was Denzel Mims with 4.5 points. None of these guys are really anything to write home about. On the Patriots side, it's the same thing. The only notable performances, I guess, that's being generous here, was Rhamondre Stevenson and Damian Harris, both having over 10 fantasy points. But it's not like you're very happy about that. I mean, Damian Harris was more efficient. Rhamondre Stevenson was used more in the receiving game, which is what you like to see, I guess, for Rhamondre Stevenson owners. But at the end of the day, this game was pretty much a wash for both sides. But anyways, guys, that is going to be it from me. If you guys did enjoy, please go ahead and give this video a like. Again, I'm answering every single comment, so if you guys have any fantasy football questions, I really would love to help you all out. And subscribe to the channel, turn that notification bell on so you don't miss another video. With that, guys, as always, have a good day, good night, and a good life.